What you're going to see when you are visiting places like this.
Hello, this is GEFerris, your narrator and videographer and kayak paddler. I could not resist including this footage, which actually was recorded in 2008, just to show you what the bottom looks like and what fun I always have when I come to the Aappilattoq area of Greenland to paddle. You just never know what you're going to see and what your video camera and still camera can capture that you can share with everyone. Thank you. I left the forest or peat and paddled up to this campground in one day. The sun was bright. It was a beautiful day. I arrived at 10 in the evening. I was pretty tired. I had stopped a couple of places before and looked around, but I noticed on the islands just before this place that there wasn't any water, so that meant no reason to camp there. Water is extremely important for me. I also found that in among this bog that was on top of the rocks in this spot that there was wonderful plants to look at, which indicated it was a very nice place to be. So I had my dinner and went to bed. And at about 4 o'clock in the morning, lo and behold, Tom and Rosa Peterson came by with their motorboat. They were on their way back to Aappilattoq with the fish they'd caught, and they stopped to see how I was. It sure was nice hearing the motorboat and knowing I'm not completely alone in this area I've never been in before. So we had a great talk. Tom showed me on the map where I could go, which of course could only be around the north end of Nodamut. He was sure that I could make it, even though other people had told me that there was too much ice and that I should not try to go that way. So I went back to sleep and woke up around 7 and had breakfast and had a wonderful time taking photographs of the plants in the bog where I was sleeping. They were beautiful. They were starting to show their fall foliage, and one of the things I found that was very exciting was some birch. I was so delighted with this area. There were loads of blueberries and crowberries, and I could eat them and enjoy them. And they always say it's a wonderful place to go down in the fjords to gather berries, and this was proof. One thing I found very interesting in the rock surfaces is wherever there was a body of iron of this density, there weren't any plants growing on the surface. When I read Frederica de Laguna's book about voyaging in Aappilattoq, she mentioned that the iron ore bodies are so dense they can affect the function of your compass seriously. And the compass will just show you where the nearest iron ore body is. And in the next footage, I was passing between a couple of islands in 1992 when I was west of Aappilattoq.
Now we're coming out of the passage. This little island I'm going by has an ore body there that looks like it's pretty solid iron. Do wonders for a compass.
So then I heard another motorboat going by, and I watched them as they went behind an island across the way. And I wondered, oh, well, that's interesting. But another motorboat. Wasn't that great? As I looked into the water, I noticed that the rocks in this area have a very lush growth of seaweed on them, and there were loads of sea urchins down there. So Tom told me that this happened to be an unexpectedly good area for catching crabs, large crabs, and that there now was a big industry in catching crabs right in this area. One of the major reasons why the fjords are so rich in sea life is because of all the rock flour heavily enriched with iron that runs into this water, promoting fantastic growth of marine life. I got on the water around 2 in the afternoon, and before I went very far, I went and gathered a bunch of sea urchins and enjoyed them. What a thrill. The bottom happened to be white feldspar, which is very convenient for noticing and being able to catch sea urchins. White feldspar has quite a bit of phosphate in it, which dissolves and enriches the seawater. Even though I took this footage in 2008 in another area, it's very similar to what it looked like on the bottom when I was here in this area in 2003. It shows lots of sea urchins. I got on the water in the early afternoon, and after having gathered some sea urchins, I paddled across to Laksefjord Island, where I had seen boats pass by. I figured that was my safest route along that shore. And what was interesting as I went along that shore was that I was very lucky because the shore was very hospitable. It had numerous rock ramps and beautiful stone. This island I passed by, and this was an island where a motorboat had gone on the opposite side of it and then gone up the passage on the south side of Laksefjord Island. However, I was going to head around to the north side of that island. You can see in this blurry photograph these rock ramps. They are a brown granite, quite smooth, kind of a gabbro type of granite. And also there were a couple of generous brooks coming down to the water where one could pull in and camp. However, there wasn't that flat protected area that there was where I had just come from. Everything was rounded and sloping, not particularly good for setting up a tent. I apologize for this out of focus picture, but what it is a picture of happens to be an area that is glaciated such that it's actually half of a cylinder. Very interesting to look at from a kayak. Some years later, I learned from Bo Albrechtsen at the museum that in this valley is an absolutely fascinating archaeological site, quite a large one. Bo described it to me as a playground, but also remnants of Thule house foundations and other house foundations, longhouse foundations, are found in this region, making it really exciting to think about. As I was passing by, and I happened to be looking north in this picture, I spotted another motorboat. Oh boy, did that ever help me a lot, because that meant to me that this was a direction and the way I should go to get back to Aappilattoq. As I was rounding the edge of Laksefjord Island, the wind was becoming stronger and stronger. It was blowing out of the west, and I was having a good challenge there, to say the least. But then I spotted these bird cliffs on the opposite side. So, of course, I had to paddle over there. The current was running at me at 5 knots, and it took me a long time and a lot of effort to get over to the bird cliffs. While I was taking the photograph of this cliff that's mainly inhabited by cormorants, judging by all the wide excrement on the cliffs, I lost considerable ground. Continuing past the bird cliffs, I got to the intersection, and there I came across a series of whirlpools. They were so powerful that I did have to correct with my rudder and my paddle. The rudder is especially good for multi-adjustments so that I can drop it to whatever level I need for the moment. And the paddle is a Wenatchee whitewater paddle, which has a nice large blade, easy to lean out on. I was finding that this inflatable bottom cushion of the seat is very comfortable because I could inflate it to just the right amount so that I wouldn't develop any pressure points and become uncomfortable. These whirlpools were a definite indicator of how powerful the currents are here, sluicing through these rock passages between these islands and peninsulas. I paddled generally along Aappilattoq, and on my way up there I did catch a glimpse of the glacier that was just past the Bird Cliffs, but as I got up further I came to an area that was very suspicious. Where I was paddling, the current was so strong I wound up just paddling in place, so I realized I had to cross over to the opposite side. I was back on the other side of Sinangasoc side, and I crossed over there because I could see there was this narrows where water was rushing through. So I thought the safest thing would be to be very close to Sinangasoc and to paddle along there to get through this narrows. I had not seen anything like that before in Greenland, although of course things like that do exist. I can tell you one thing, I sure didn't stop and take any pictures. That was one of those whitewater swirl around situations, and I was very glad I made it through there unscathed. From there I popped out of the shadows and started paddling toward Aappilattoq because I could see that the wind was blowing very strongly in my face, and that the only shelter was on the opposite side, the north side, where I could paddle up close to the island and avoid the wind, as you can see in these photographs. I was playing the age-old game called hide in the wind shadows, and you can tell by the ripples on the water where the wind is and isn't. And if you want to conserve energy, it's well worthwhile hiding from the wind. The sun was ghastly bright. It was in the west, and it was about 5 o'clock in the evening, but I really like to hide from the sun as well if it's possible. This is a glacial erratic, and on the horizon of Aappilattoq Island, that was what I could see. These glacial erratics dotting the landscape. I really did hug along the island, anything to avoid the wind. And when I got up to the end, that was very interesting because I could see something strange on the horizon. I could see to the north an eerie white high point that I couldn't quite make out on the horizon. And sure enough, it was the Greenland ice cap. Here was the ice cap, and you can also see in the foreground the condition of the water. It's a little bit rough, but the waves weren't all that high, but it was wind. This was Such an extraordinary view of the ice cap, and the island in the foreground had to be off of Aappilattoq Island, where I was. Then I'd started out making the crossing over to Naudamut, which was not really too bad. The conditions were quelling as the sun was getting lower on the horizon. The wind was dropping. One of the delightful moments during this crossing was when I got to a point where the wind from both directions stopped blowing. It was what I would call neutral air. And paddling in these fjords is fascinating because the air circulates during the time of day according to the sun, and it can have a tremendous effect along with the currents on how fast you can paddle. Along the south coast of Aappilattoq Island, I resorted to paddling as close to its coastline as possible because it was keeping me sheltered from the wind. Being a savvy long-distance paddler, I knew the game. It's very important to hide into wind shadows. Matthias Lupstrom told me that same idea. You always stay in the wind shadows as much as possible to save your energy. Why work when you don't have to? This was the west face of Aappilattoq Island, and it had a few bird nests on it, but also festooned all over the top of the island were glacial erratics, rocks just teetering, held up by a few little pebbles underneath that were kind of fun to look at. Now I am on my way across over to Naudamut, and I'm heading for the end of Naudamut. This is a view of the northeast point of the island. Just a great accomplishment in my mind to have attained after all these years of various attempts. And beyond that is the Aappilattoq fjord with all its ice. How exciting it was to me to be able to see for myself in my kayak the tip of this huge island, Naudamut. When I was paddling in 1992 in this area, there was so much ice because Mount Pinatubo had erupted that it was impossible for me to even imagine getting into this area because it was just packed with ice. Now I could see from my kayak those farther islands out there in Aappilattoq fjord. I'm getting close to Naudamut, and you can see some rock aprons, which are very helpful and convenient if you need to get off the water in a hurry. The only problem with the rock aprons from a kayak perspective is, would there be some space to set up a tent? Or is it just a sheer side hill of rock coming down to these aprons? So yes, it's nice to have these aprons all along, but you never know whether you can actually really get out and set up camp. That was the unknown that I had to think about while I was paddling through this area. I'd never been here before, and I had no idea what was in store. Here are two maps that just generally show where I was, just to give you perspective of how it's possible that I would be able to see the ice cap in such clarity from where I was in my kayak. In this area of Aappilattoq, it's convenient having so many islands because you can triangulate among the islands and pretty much tell where you are, which this picture does illustrate, because you can see I'm on my way across and there's no definite island where there was previously. I've included this picture which is out of focus, but what is interesting is it shows the height of the sun above the horizon. It was getting to be late in the afternoon, 6, 7 o'clock, something like that. And it was getting to be the quiet time. This was a chunk of ice. One of those things that's very fascinating to look at when the sun is low on the water. You get to see through the ice with a very different perspective. To get just the right angle and amount of reflection with the ice, I had to back up and coast by a couple of times before I got just the right moment for this shot. But it's one of the great pleasures of being a kayak paddler, is you're sitting right on the water. Now it was completely calm. All I had to do was just to sit back and paddle. But that was an interesting thing to think about, because I really had quite a few miles to go and I never knew where I could pull in, so I just kept paddling. Next is from 2008, some live video of encounters with ice.
And here's an iceberg. Interesting shape for an iceberg to have melted into. Interesting shape for an iceberg to have melted into. And this is the smorgasbord of icebergs. So, I am not going to cross the Aappilattoq ice fjord because it might be just a mass of little shards of ice. Just endless shards of ice. And I don't like this kind of risk.
I have speeded this up, but I wanted to show you what an iceberg looks like when it's rolling over. Very frightening. I recorded this in Laksefjord when a giant iceberg was breaking up. To show you the kind of waves they generate, you have to know how to surf in a kayak. This is just to show you the amount of debris that an iceberg instantly generates. Something also to think about when you're kayaking near them. As I was paddling along, it was getting colder and colder, and then I came into an area that had much denser ice, and I became really concerned about whether I could get through this ice. And as I was going past some ice, a chunk popped up and hit the bow of my boat, and it was a very sharp piece that had calved off from the bottom of an iceberg. I realized that what I was doing was really quite dangerous. And as I was also getting colder, I was getting more fearful. I tried to bundle myself up as much as possible by adjusting the hood I was wearing. I looked around as I got to behind what I could figure must have been Aappilattoq Island, and I realized there's nowhere I can come in and camp, and it's very cold among all of this ice, along with the fact that I might wake up the next morning and find myself completely surrounded with ice, getting to do what's called dry out. I pulled my hood up around my face. I had a balaclava on my head and tried rebreathing the warm air I exhaled. Tried singing to stay warm, but I was really cold and scared. and quite worried. And then I got to a place where this was what I saw. I saw this island lined up behind another island. So I knew I was somewhat near Aappilattoq. But in the foreground was this iceberg. But I got to watch the sunset behind this island. So it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, actually. All I knew was that it was too cold, and I just had to keep moving, keep paddling, regardless. And this was the kind of light I was paddling in at this point in time. I didn't care. All I cared about was getting to Aappilattoq, and I was rounding the island, which was a little disorienting for me. The problem with paddling around the northern tip of Aappilattoq Island was that now I was heading southwest instead of due west. And this was disorienting because every nook and cranny, all of the inlets, could have Aappilattoq nestled in them, and I didn't know which one it might be, and I could just as easily just paddle right past the whole thing and head out for the next island, totally missing the whole thing. I passed by numerous hospitable-looking inlets, and there was nothing there. It was absolutely dead quiet on the water. But at long last, I came upon Aappilattoq, and it really didn't look like much from where I was on the water. So I swung in, and there I was, to be reunited with Adam and his wonderful wife. I have included this video that I made and recorded in 1995, just so you can see what it's like to be in Aappilattoq and have a good time. It's a wonderful town to be able to visit in northwestern Greenland, Upernavik Commune. Thanks for watching this video I made. Soapstone. Smoked hellefisk. This is where he carves his soapstone. Aha! Yes. And here we are in Aappilattoq. He's making stone carving. He is carving this stone. It's going to be very nice when it's finished. He has a smoker for the hellefisk, and he is using Greenland natural flowers. I smell them. Matthias, those smell very nice. He has burning Kassipi tetragona Arctic heat to smoke the fish. And you can see it burns very nice. So it goes up the rocks into this chamber up on the top and makes smoked hellefisk or halibut.
So this is his invention. Very, very nice. Jellyfish smoked.
Sometimes this is long time here. This is long time.
Slow to smoke.
Yeah,
Oh,
Okay.
very nice. So beautiful. Yes. We're having a good time here in Matthias' house. Adam Krim is here, Matthias is here, his daughter. And here he has a small jellyfish sitting in bags. Very good.
Laksefjord.